Hello and welcome to episode 4 of our Internet Marketing for Dummies / Wanna Save the Business video marketing series. In this video, we're going to be doing what I'm going to call a technical manual. So we're going to be looking, peeling back the curtains and looking at some actual code for implementing a really important part of our advertising solution and e-commerce in general, which is tracking sales, tracking conversions in AdWords. And Google Analytics. Now, it should be said that this is a technical video. If you don't have a technical background and you're not actually responsible for this process, this video will not be of any use to you. You can safely skip it. However, if you are in charge of actually implementing your e-commerce conversion data, then this video will absolutely help. Overall, it's actually a pretty simple process, but like I say, sometimes it's nice just to see it in action. So let's get started. So first things first, we want to make sure that we're actually set up in Google Analytics to actually collect e-commerce information. And the easiest way to check and see if you are is to go into the main page of Google Analytics, go to Conversions, E-commerce, and Overview. And if you see just a solid line right here, yet you know you've had sales in the last 30 days or so, then it's not enabled for you. And so you're going to want to follow this link right here, set up e-commerce data collection, and then follow these 7 steps that you find at the top of the page. So in other words, if you're not currently tracking e-commerce data, then you need to enable it first. Now, in my particular case, I had the slightly unique scenario of I was collecting e-commerce data at one point, but then I updated and changed a lot of stuff about my store, and I never got around to re-adding that data back in. And so I actually have a situation where I was collecting it, but no longer am. And so I actually get a little notification right here that says you're missing e-commerce data. And we'll kind of circle around back to that here shortly to see what we can do about that. But for now, the implementation, whether you're missing it or it's never been activated, is the exact same. We follow these 7 steps to actually tell Google to start tracking that data. Now, as soon as you're done with that step, you next have to decide what kind of tracking you want to use. Now, in this video, we're going to do the simple setup, which is just tracking on the web. There are other methods of tracking though, tracking in apps or using Tag Manager. We're just going to cover the web version in this video. Now, when we're ready to get started then, I actually recommend clicking on this link right here, so e-commerce tracking documentation. That'll actually take you to this page right here, which as a coder makes me smile because this is all delicious code, all the delicious code that I need to actually implement this. Now here's the long story short version. When it comes to actually sending e-commerce data off to Google, it's actually really simple. As long as you have Google Analytics enabled for that page, it is 4 distinct lines or 4 distinct blocks of code. It's this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. So it's just 4 blocks of code that is wrapped into a script block and then sent off on your confirmation page of your e-commerce process. The trick to all this, and we're going to cover this lightly but not get into too much detail, is populating the values for these different blocks. Now, this block has no definable values, so this is just going to stay the same. We just require the e-commerce module of the Google Analytics system. It's like a plugin, but then these guys are where the rubber meets the road, as it were. So we basically add a transaction and then items to that transaction. And so I just have 1 item per transaction, so I'm going to get each one of these blocks once. But in that simple case, then it looks something like this. So I call to e-commerce add transaction. I then provide a transaction ID. I then provide an affiliate or store name, a grand total, shipping, and tax. What's key about this is some of these values can be hard-coded and some of these values can be or will be dynamic. So for example, in my particular case, a transaction ID has got to be something that's unique that identifies that transaction. Now this is going to vary depending on whatever you're using for an e-commerce solution. In my case, I use PayPal and it's all custom coded. So when PayPal returns a successful transaction back to me, I actually get a unique transaction ID. And so I've chosen to use that for this value. So that's going to be, though, what's key about this, unique for every transaction on my site, right? So you hit that thank you for shopping with us or thank you for purchasing page, I'm going to have unique value for that. Others I can actually hard code, again, in my case. So my affiliate or store name is just simply Nick's Off Store, right? It's the same for every transaction. Grand total, the actual amount right here, if you have a single item, would be a hard-coded one-time value. But if you had sales or if you have multiple items, this will also be unique. And so what it basically comes down to then is you need to write code that actually populates dynamic values to these JavaScript items. And they actually provide, Google does, an example of that right here using, in this case, because I use PHP code, where we basically create a list of items that were purchased. And you can see here, we're just creating associative arrays of these items. And then we're basically spitting out JavaScript code right here that has those unique items populated. Now, in my case, because I only have one item and because I only have essentially one storefront collecting off of a single tracking tag, I came up with this code right here. So it's broken into two parts. So part one is the part of the code where I actually define some local variables that is going to be populated with these dynamic values from my payment system. I know that's kind of a mouthful, but in other words, what I mean is I get the revenue, which is then used right here. That is the grand total and unit price from a session variable that I defined earlier called, for technical reasons, trial price. So trial price is going to be whatever the user paid. The name of the product, again, because I have multiple products, can vary. That will come from a session variable named product name, and so on and so forth for the rest of these items right here. So this is defined at the top of the page. And then this, part two right here, is at the bottom of the page. So basically what part two does is it just takes all this code that Google said we need to send in the first place, but then populates it with our dynamic and unique values, and then is going to spit that off to the Google Analytics servers. And so in actual implementation, it looks a little something like this. So I go to my code for my page, and here is the top of the page that we're looking at right here. This is, I actually have two different payment methods. So this is off of one of my payment methods, doesn't matter, it's the same code. But I basically say, do I want to use e-commerce analytics? By default, false. But if I have a successful transaction on this page, then I'm going to use it. I then populate my my little local variables here with those, again, trial price, the product name, the unique ID for the transaction. And then at the bottom of the page, this is where I'm actually now defining that script that gets sent. So again, I'm gating this behind a variable that says, do I want to use analytics? Again, I only use analytics if the transaction was successful. And if it is, I just have a dynamic block of PHP that's going to spit out at runtime a script which is going to send this data off to Google. So in other words, it's actually a really simple process. This is all it is. It's just a block of JavaScript code. It's creating the JavaScript code and the values that go in there that's going to be the tricky part, because it's going to depend very highly on what your actual system looks like. To use a shopping cart, to use a storefront with a pre-coded, all these different ways. In the end, though, you just need a few unique identifiers and pieces of information. Okay, with that done then, I basically took both of these now updated confirmation pages and I uploaded those to my server, and now it's going to be time to actually test this. And so there's two main things here. Now again, in my case, because I actually had e-commerce tracking set up previously and I had changed my storefront and removed it, I actually get this little, again, notification, which allows me to basically, and I haven't actually done this yet, but I can click this check again link right here and it'll actually say, right, we're going to check this and we should know if it works within 24 hours or so. So I don't know how well this is going to work, and I only say this because my storefront literally can't be checked unless you actually purchase something. So we'll see how this works, but I'm going to let it go anywhere. I'm just going to say pending notifications. Maybe it'll find some error that I didn't. So I'm just going to kind of leave that running. But then there's also the idea of using Tag Assistant. So there is a product, I haven't actually done this either, but Tag Assistant helps us troubleshoot our various Google implementations. And so in this particular case, we would want to troubleshoot our analytics e-commerce setting. I haven't actually done this yet either. I'm about to. We might have a separate video about this for testing, but for right now, I'm going to do this. And I'm also going to actually go through my test storefront and submit a couple transactions and see if that data is making it to Google. Because obviously, there's no point in doing something if you can't actually test it. So that is the next step. But because I've already done this before, I basically know this is going to work already. I even had old code sitting around from the previous installation that worked just fine. And so my new code's a little bit different, but mostly the same. So I know it's going to work, but if you're doing this for the first time, you absolutely need to test all this stuff. So yeah, so that's basically it. As I always like to say, if this video is helpful, please let us know. Please recommend us to your friends and spread the word. Spread the word about RackForms, spread the word about this series. Subscribe to this channel. We're going to keep pushing along here until we make RackForms successful. And part of being successful is having data and knowing what to do with that data. And hopefully we are going to be, with e-commerce data here, much closer to that goal. So I shall leave it at that. Again, programming note, hopefully we're going to have our interview with our marketing expert in the next couple days or so. So stay tuned for that. And we'll hope to see you then.